This is absolutely wild. There is a trade suggestion out there that is putting out the possibility of Kevin Durant being traded from the Phoenix Suns to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, who exactly would the Suns be getting back for KD? We are going to break it all down on this episode of Suns Digest. My name is CJ Pierre, and I'm here to break down this potential, not real trade possibility. It could be a possibility. We're gonna talk about it, and we're gonna find out. Just go break it all down. But first, we noticed that there's about 88% of you guys that are watching our videos, and we appreciate that. But you're not subscribed to the channel just yet. We have a goal of trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers. So if you want to make sure you're keeping up with all the latest rumors, trade talk, anything like that, anything that's coming up with coaching changes for the Phoenix Suns this coming off season, hit that subscribe button below so you can keep up with everything that we've got cooking for you. And we're just going to get right into this one. The speculation that is kind of being put out there right now is just kind of making its way across the internet. Could the Phoenix Suns trade Kevin Durant to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Karl-Anthony Towns? Now, this is not being reported, by any, this isn't a Woj bomb or anything like that. Nothing from Shams here. This is just kind of pure speculation coming out from a blog out of Minnesota, and that blog is called the Minnesota Sports Fan Blog. And just someone named Eric Streakhair wrote the article about trading Karl-Anthony Towns for Kevin Durant makes too much sense to ignore. Now, keep in mind, this article was written from a Minnesota Timberwolves fan perspective, but we're going to take a look at this from a Phoenix Suns fan perspective. Is this something that the Phoenix Suns should take a look at and seriously consider trading Kevin Durant for Karl-Anthony Towns, All-Star, for All-Star? Well, first, before we even talk about that, we have to break down the Suns cap situation as well as the Minnesota Timberwolves cap situation. Both of these teams are second apron teams, projected to be second apron teams heading into next season. That's going to be especially true for the Phoenix Suns if they end up re-signing Royce O'Neal, which me and Bruce broke down in a previous video. So the Phoenix Suns, not a lot of flexibility. The Minnesota Timberwolves, not a lot of flexibility. However, given what the second apron rules are, you can trade a player for player as long as the salaries basically match up. And in this particular instance, the salaries for Kevin Durant and Karl-Anthony Towns are close enough that it would qualify under the second apron rules if it was player for player. Kevin Durant making $51.1 million. Karl-Anthony Towns just making south of $50 million next season as well. It's just in range that would allow these two second apron teams to make this trade between each other. It would keep them both in the second apron, and they wouldn't be needing to aggregate salaries to make this trade happen. The Suns wouldn't need to add another player to acquire Towns. The Minnesota Timberwolves would need to add another player to acquire Kevin Durant. So the trade in itself, is it something that the Phoenix Suns should make? Why is this a good trade for the Phoenix Suns? We're talking about Kevin Durant, one of the top 15 players in NBA history, and trading him for a player like Karl-Anthony Towns, a former number one overall pick for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Has kind of, been hammered in the media for his inconsistent play, being in foul trouble, but he's also one of the best big man three-point shooters that we've ever seen in the game, a very talented offensive player, improved defensive player, particularly over the course of this last season. Would he be a welcome addition to the Phoenix Suns if you're going to trade Kevin Durant? You got to try and figure out where the fit is and how that happens. So if you look at the potential trade as a vacuum, Kevin Durant for Karl-Anthony Towns, I don't think it works out player for player. The Suns may want to either get something else back in return, or maybe some draft capital, because the Minnesota Timberwolves do have some draft capital to play with. I knew they gave up a lot of picks in the Rudy Gobert trade, but they still have some things that they can work with, and they have some young players, some other key pieces that the Suns may want to look at acquiring. And if you think about it, even if you add some other picks to the mix or another player like Nickeil Alexander-Walker from the Minnesota Timberwolves, for example, you throw in Eric Gordon, who's on his player option. If he takes his player option, you add in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and you can potentially get the Timberwolves 2024 first-round pick. That gives the Phoenix Suns some flexibility. Then they have 2 first-round draft picks instead of just the one that they have at pick number 22. And they could potentially make a move in the draft by trading 2 of those first-round picks, or maybe make another trade that can acquire another significant piece because they would have an additional first-round pick to work with. Not to mention, if you look at this particular trade that I just showed you guys a second ago, including Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you're adding a wing defender who is also a solid three-point shooter, along with Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, how do they fit into what the makeup of the Suns would look like? You'd have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Karl-Anthony Towns. That's your new big three. Well, Karl-Anthony Towns just recently has familiarity playing at the 4, playing with another big man with Rudy Gobert, so he could fit in playing with Nurkic. Or the Suns could move Nurkic, Cat could move to the 5. Then you have a stretch 5 that you can then fill in the pieces around with Devin Booker, with Bradley Beal, and play more similarly to what Mike Budenholzer would like. Mike Budenholzer played in Milwaukee, won a championship with Brook Lopez, who turned himself into a stretch 5, being able to shoot from the perimeter. You would have a significant upgrade in that department with Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns isn't Brook Lopez on the defensive side of the ball, but Mike Budenholzer is an offensive coach. So at this point, defense is a little bit optional as far as I'm concerned. Not to mention the familiarity that Karl-Anthony Towns has with Devin Booker. It's well documented that they are good friends. They both went to Kentucky, were one and done at Kentucky, and making a Final Four together. Devin Booker and Karl-Anthony Towns have long been able to get along. They would be able to find chemistry pretty quickly, and I think Karl-Anthony Towns could benefit from playing with a player like Booker. He's already played with a ball-dominant guard in Anthony Edwards. If the Suns were then able to acquire a true point guard that Karl-Anthony Towns could work off of in terms of doing pick and rolls, pick and pops, that would be an ideal situation. And then, not to mention, opens up the lane, allows there not to be too much blockage in there. If they do trade Nurkic and Karl-Anthony Towns as center, he can step out on the perimeter and open up clear paths for guys like Beal and Booker to attack the basket. It kind of makes a little bit of sense. Now, obviously, you're losing Kevin Durant and adding Karl-Anthony Towns, so you feel, in a sense, that there's a bit of a drop-off, and that's kind of where we get into why, at the end of the day, the Phoenix Suns shouldn't make this trade. I think that from the Minnesota's perspective, you're adding Kevin Durant, one of the top 15 players in the world, to a team that was just in the Western Conference Finals. He could be the key piece that puts you over the hump. As far as the Phoenix Suns, when you're comparing Kevin Durant and Karl-Anthony Towns, there kind of really isn't a direct comparison when you're talking about player for player. Now, obviously, the benefit for Karl-Anthony Towns is he's much younger than Kevin Durant. Karl-Anthony Towns is 28 years old. Kevin Durant's 35. But when you look at what they did on the offensive end over the course of this past season, it's kind of, a no contest in that regard. Kevin Durant averaging 27 points per game, Karl-Anthony Towns only 21. Now, obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns, big man, 7 feet tall, averaged slightly more rebounds, but Kevin Durant, also a 7-footer, even though he's more of a perimeter player, still averaged 6 rebounds per game as well. And then Kevin Durant, also a solid playmaker, averaging 5 assists per game. So, player for player, Kevin Durant is a better player than Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, you talk about fit. I think Kevin Durant still fits better with what Mike Budenholzer wants to do because of his capabilities as an individual player, his ability to ISO, his ability to attack the basket off the dribble, and his ability to shoot threes, which are just not the same things that Karl-Anthony Towns bring to the table, not to mention Karl-Anthony Towns' inconsistent play and his ability to get in foul trouble, particularly in the postseason. We're going to take a look at these are Karl-Anthony Towns' postseason averages, and if you take a look, he averaged only over 20 points per game one time in his 4 different attempts in the playoffs. That one time being in a 6-game series against Memphis a couple of years ago. But all of his numbers take a dip compared to what he did in the regular season. That is mostly due to his inconsistent play. He has times where he gets into foul trouble and comes off the court and is not able to contribute much to the team offensively or defensively, especially when he's not on the court. Now, in this past playoffs, he had a solid playoff series against Phoenix. He had a good playoff series against Denver, but then he had an atrocious playoff series in the Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Mavericks. What kind of Karl-Anthony Towns are you going to get when the money's on the line, when everything is pressure cooked? I don't know. And at the end of the day, I think that is the number one reason why I would make this trade. I'd rather have Kevin Durant over Karl-Anthony Towns on the Phoenix Suns moving forward. I think obviously when you're looking at this trade from a Minnesota fan's perspective, it makes sense. You're getting Kevin Durant, who can play the 4 already. He's comfortable in that position, and he wouldn't be hindered by the presence of a Rudy Gobert clogging the lane as much as Karl-Anthony Towns is, because Karl-Anthony Towns can't post up with Rudy Gobert there as easily as he would. He has some difficulty attacking the basket with Rudy Gobert on the floor as he normally would. I don't think Kevin Durant would have those same kind of issues. So I personally think that if they're Phoenix Suns, if the Minnesota Timberwolves were to make this trade offer, they would have to probably put in some additional pieces to try and make it enticing. Now, when we look back at that trade that I showed you earlier about with adding Eric Gordon in for the player count, and then you get Karl-Anthony Towns, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and a first-round pick, that seems a little bit more enticing, but I still don't think that would be enough to suffice all you gave up for Kevin Durant initially, and then this is what you're getting for Kevin Durant, who's one of the top 15 players in the NBA. So, all in all, interesting article. It was fun to look at, fun to think about, but I don't necessarily think the Phoenix Suns should make that trade. But that's just me. That's just what I think. We want to know what you think. Do you think the Phoenix Suns should trade Kevin Durant for Karl-Anthony Towns for the Minnesota Timberwolves? If you think it's crazy, let us know. If you think it's a great idea, let us know. Hit the comment section below. Talk about what you guys think and how you're feeling about what the Phoenix Suns could do in the coming days leading into the summer. We are going to have so much coverage for you guys coming up. The Phoenix Suns are making additions to their coaching staff. They're also having things turned down from their coaching staff. Bruce did a video on Darvin Ham. Obviously, there are going to be continuous rumors up into the draft surrounding Bronny James, LeBron James possibly coming to Phoenix. We've been talking about that. We're going to continue to talk about everything related to the Phoenix Suns this offseason. You want to make sure you're not missing anything. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you can keep up with everything that we're going to have leading up into the summer, into the draft, into the NBA free agency, and into the offseason. And again, hopefully for the Phoenix Suns as they look to make a championship run in the 2024-2025 season. Well, that's all I've got for you guys this time. Again, my name is CJ Pierre. This is Suns Digest, and go Phoenix Suns.